Morning, everyone. On behalf of the American University of Beirut and the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, I would like to welcome all of you to Beirut, to AUB, and to this conference. My name is Patrick McGreevy. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at AUB. The Arab region seems to be at a critical historical juncture. It's one that's completely different than 1967, yet it promises a similar rupture from what came before. From some perspectives, rupture is at the heart of the modern. At the height of the Cold War, in the mid-1960s, the U.S. State Department it had a public diplomacy initiative in the Arab world, which included two interesting exhibitions in Beirut. The first one focused on American skyscrapers. The second one on the U.S. space program. Clearly, part of the logic was to present the United States as the embodiment of the irresistible juggernaut of modernity. The glittering skyscraper rips open the traditional urban fabric, the magic of blast-off, rupture from the past. This narrative was not only directed at people of what we then called the Third World. I remember that from the vantage point of a working class neighborhood in an American industrial city, it seemed to promise something sublime. Today, it seems like a complete romantic illusion. Another thing to fix the eyeballs while people toil and content themselves with the pleasures of the purchase. But then I wonder, did the State Department actually calculate that there was an eagerness for the ruptures of modernity in sites such as Beirut? When I arrived here 8 years ago, I was struck by the not entirely ruined evidence of such an eagerness. Not just the Nehemiah monuments in Tripoli, but the candle holders, the lamps, the ashtrays, everything that was in Beirut apartments. North America and Europe were crazy for the Victorian architecture and older architecture. But in Beirut, there didn't seem to be much nostalgia, not even for the remnants of modernity. Frederick Jameson suggested that the appearance of African so-called primitive motifs in early 20th century European painting signified a rupture of the European middle classes from the people of the colonies that actually sustained their lives. It was a connection that they didn't acknowledge as part of the same domain. Yet the government in Paris not only controlled France, it controlled vast swaths of North Africa, West Africa, the Caribbean, and Southeast Asia. And yet it promised liberté, égalité, and fraternité only to those few who were designated as French. So this was a very fundamental rupture that is somehow connected to the emergence of the modern. But if rupture is what renders one modern, Paul Gilroy and others propose that it was African slaves on the Middle Passage across the Atlantic who were first thrust into this sensibility. The fact that blues, rock, jazz, and hip-hop have become a kind of soundtrack for the globe suggests that this sensibility is bleeding into almost every corner. Interestingly, the US State Department sent black jazz and blues performers to the Third World, including to the Arab world, in the 1950s and 1960s. These attempts to win hearts and minds were almost a complete failure, partly because of a basic miscalculation. Who was the intended audience? To give you an example of this, during an Iraqi tour in 1963, organized by the State Department, the members of Duke Ellington's band complained that they were playing only for elites, while they expected to play for, quote, the people, the men in the streets who clustered around the tea shop radios. After their performance, an attempted coup threw the city into turmoil. Taking advantage of the chaos, several members of Ellington's band snuck out to a crowded Baghdad nightclub, and they danced all night with the local patrons. Ruptures, it seems, can also present opportunities for connections. 4 years later came 1967, the subject of your discussions today. But what kind of a rupture was 1967? A shattering of illusions? For some, it seemed to yield clarity. For others, fragmentation. But every rupture also provides an altered field of potential connections. We might ask ourselves, in this regard, do we wish that the ruptures of the contemporary Arab moment have equal longevity as the one of 1967? Well, forgive me for being impressionistic about things which I know must be precisely situated historically and geographically. That, I assume, is one of the purposes of your encounters here today. And I hope you have fruitful ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dean McGreevy, for your introduction, setting the stage actually for the discussion that would follow, and for hosting us, for us being able to have the conference here. In fact, I'm going to keep my remarks really short. I am Nada Shabout, the current president of AMCA, on my way out, hopefully. And we do have all of our AMCA officers here. AMCA, for those of you who are not familiar with us, is the Association for Modern and Contemporary Art from the Arab world, Iran and Turkey. We have been in existence since 2007, 2008, and this is our second conference, actually. Our first conference was in 2010 in Doha at with the opening of Madhaf Arab Museum of Modern Art. Our hope, AMCA's hope, is to actually build connections with the region. It's very interesting that Dean McGreevy was talking about, building connections through rupture. And in many ways, some of us do feel that rupture, even geographically at the moment. And so the idea of having us hold conferences in the region and interact with what's happening is specifically what AMCA aims to do, and hopefully we'll continue this tradition of hopping around the region, the Middle East, and having conferences, assuming that things calm down a bit more. I would, before we start, and I'm not going to stay in schedule, I will just like to thank a few people who made this conference very possible, particularly our funders. And I apologize, looking at the abstract, I realized, I suppose, because of space, we're not able to put all the names that need to be on the abstracts, on the program. Our funders, Rana Sadat and Samer Yunus, the Dean of FAS and the Provost offices, the Fine Arts Department at AUB, Fine Arts finance too would be nice. The finance department at AUB, with special thanks to Chair Rico Francis and to Angela, who mediated and facilitated all of that. Also like to thank Saleh Barakat for partly sponsoring the conference, and to like to thank Salma Maghdadi, our president-elect, who communicated all this with the funders and made all this possible for us. Then I'd like to also thank Professor Elizabeth Qassab, who came all the way to become our keynote respondent. Was commenting earlier that this is sort of a new way of doing things. Not a keynote speaker, but a keynote respondent who will in fact have the final say on everything at the end. The bios of all the participants, and because every session in fact has discussants, that may not all be included on the program, but the bios of all the discussants, all the AMCA officers, our Secretary Dina Ramadan, who will introduce the next panel, Sarah Rogers, our President-elect, and Annika, our Treasurer, and then Salma Maghdadi, the next Treasurer, President-elect, Patrick Kane, incoming Treasurer, and Alex Segerman, our incoming Secretary. So this sort of, give you ideas for the next turn of elections hopefully many of you will be running into for these offices. Okay, so with that, I thank everyone for being here, and I hope you get to enjoy the papers. I think the topic is very timely. It is an old topic that we are, rediscussing. However, under the circumstances, seems to be really very appropriate, and it's really interesting that there is a conference downstairs discussing the Arab Springs while we're, Arab Spring, one spring is enough, while we discuss 1967. Dina, I will give the floor to you. Thank you.